Ladies and gentlemen, please take your seats.
You know, it is the straight up truth that nerds can be icons too, and if you're within the sound of my voice, that must mean you're in the seats with once more. As always, my name is Dave Voigt, and I'm the host of this podcast where we sit down with a wide ranging variety of industry professionals and pick their brain about their current projects, state of the industry, how they got started, and so very much more. And you know what? If you'd like to subscribe to this podcast, and we certainly hope that you would, you can do that over, well, basically wherever you can find your podcasts. Amazon, Google, Spotify, Apple, or you can find every single one of our episodes archived over at our YouTube channel. Also, it would be fantastic if you would do us the kindness of following us on social media. You can do that at Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at either In the Seats or at It's Podcast One for all sorts of updates. And finally, and I dare say most importantly, please give us a visit over at In the Seats, intheseats.ca for all the latest and greatest movie news, reviews, and anything else we can basically shake a stick at. And that's it, because, you know, we love talking about the moving image, and we know that you like reading about it, so please come pay us a visit. But on this episode, we're actually going to talk about the moving image. We're actually going to get a little punk rock on you. We're going to talk about the movie Filmage, the story of the Descendants and the band All, which is really a punk rock sort of odyssey of the band, the Descendants, and sort of their legacy on music history, and sort of the offshoot band that is All as well. And we sort of dive into the history and sort of the importance of the legacy on the music landscape of this band. It's it's a fun one, and it's available on VOD, but it's also available on Prime as well if you want to check it out. But we sit down with the directors, one Deedle Lacour and Mr. Matt Riggle, to talk about what kicked off this story and why they wanted to tell it, and getting to know the band and sort of getting into sort of the weirdness that is the Descendants, but the legacy of it as well, because these guys, they kind of changed the game for punk rock, if you know your history, and really they are kind of pioneers because they brought a little bit of pop into the punk rock. And it's if you're a music fan, I think this is an important documentary to check out, but more importantly, check out our talk. Well, I mean, obviously, first off, just let me say thank you for the time today, guys. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely.
I mean, I always knew of the Descendants, but it was one of those things where I really felt like I needed the history, because just going through it, I mean, I think it was the line that Grohl said in the beginning that really sort of stood out for me. It's like they were the one punk band that wasn't screaming about Reagan half the time. Can you guys walk me through, I guess, maybe the initial inspiration or the idea to go, you know what? These guys deserve to have their story told.
Take that one, dude.
Well, they before when we Matt and I were fans for a long time, but we kind of discovered that they're very undocumented as a band, like before the film. Like there just wasn't a whole lot about them, and yet they had this lore in punk rock and these incredible fans. And so we got to know Stefan, the guitar player. We met him many years ago, and he ended up producing actually a record that Matt and we went in the studio with him and worked with him, and we spent all our time just asking him questions about the band and the history, and show us how to play this song on the guitar. And so we were paying studio time to basically hang out with Stefan and learn about the band. And that's when the idea first started. And that was, 15 years ago. So just they are such a cool band, such a cool story. And for the hardcore fans, you know some of it, but there's just so little info and about them. So it seemed like a story that needed to be told.
Well, I mean, the band in all its various iterations really did feel like this moving target almost. I mean, it almost felt like a sports team in many ways. It was like, okay, next man up, someone's out, okay, next guy in, go. Like, how did you, like, when you're putting all this together, and like, and I guess because I mean on documentary like this, you've got to do interviews, you got to do research. Like, where do you sort of pull material from? Is it stuff that the guys have? Is it like, are you reaching out to fans? I'm always kind of curious about sort of how you sort of bring in all this archival material.
Yeah, I mean, it was a little of both. It was like fans sent stuff. Deedle can tell the story about Bill loading up our van with box after box of of videotapes he had that, like, Bill. I mean, Bill notoriously didn't like people filming their shows back in the day, to the point where he would send his roadie out. Some guys has a tape, and he would send him, and the guy, and wouldn't Bug like take the tape half the time, and then it would just go in a box.
Yeah.
And so got all that stuff, and all the videos kind of end the same way. Oh, hey, no, that's my tape, man. No, but it's, you know what I mean? It's like there's yeah, it was like a lot of stuff nobody had ever seen. And as far as interviews, we would kind of do interviews, and every interview would kind of lead us to kind of a handful of, yeah, maybe we should interview this person. You know, it seemed like we would leave each interview knowing like, oh, we should talk to them, and them as well. You know, and so, yeah, I like your analogy of kind of like a sports, you know, because their head was down and they just kept going. All the show that night, the song they were writing that day, that's all that mattered. There was no plan whatsoever for their career, you know.
Was that the magic? Because I mean, again, these guys were there for the love of it. They weren't necessarily there for the stardom, quote unquote, but it sort of happened to them, I guess, through Bill's just sheer force of will. I've got to imagine.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, he's the I doesn't Carl say in the movie, you know, he has a line where he says, you know, you can only expect people to be a perfect example of themselves. And Bill is a perfect example of something, you know. It's like it's so singular, kind of a attitude in person. And yeah, I mean, it's just like, I think that is the magic. They never took a breath to go to. They never analyzed themselves, you know. I mean, they were just kind of pure that way, you know. And it's so rare, especially these days, when all you do in when you're a band in the age of the internet, all you do is look at yourself and go, oh, okay, let me adjust. I mean, even if it's unconsciously, you know, they just didn't even factor into them. They would just play a show and move on, you know.
Was everyone willing to take part? I mean, was there any sort of pushback when, you know, two fans, filmmakers come up and go, I want to make a movie about you? Like, were they into it, or was there pushback? Like, how did that initial introduction sort of get going?
Yeah, I mean, Stefan was the N, but it took us quite a while to get Bill on board. And also, while we were trying to get Bill on board was when he was dealing with like the tumor and all that stuff, and he was kind of like half losing his mind. So but it took a while to get Bill on board, for us to earn his trust. But they stayed very, very hands off. You know, he basically he realized that we were gonna do it, like do the story somewhat, you know, justice, or at least honestly, like an honest take on it. And they were very hands off. Pretty much everybody that was part of the whole family shrub participated except one guy, and he still ultimately talked to us some, and I think he ended up going to a screening or seeing it. But he's just a guy that doesn't want to be, you know, on camera. And he was way back in the day, you know, one quick iteration. So everybody else was pretty happy to get on board and talk.
Yeah,
they go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, it's kind of remarkable that people who are in the band, and there's a lot of former members, you know, you look at on some bands, you look at that list of former members and it reads like, you know, a list of enemies, you know what I'm saying? But these guys are all literally friends. Like, it's weird how, like, Scott Reynolds is friends with Doug. Like, they weren't even in the band at the same time. You know what I mean? They're all friends. They all know each other. It is like a family. But anyway, they, you know, even the people in the band, when we contact them, they all want to talk. Like, oh yeah, I love that era of my life. You know, I want to talk about that. And, you know, not to mention people who weren't in the band who love to talk about the Descendants. You know, people that just kind of in or out of the band seem to love to talk about their, you know, being in that force of the Descendants, you know.
How important was it, do you think, to sort of include the story of all sort of in this story? Because I mean, I knew all existed, but I never really sort of appreciated how intricately tied they were to sort of the legacy of the Descendants.
Yeah, I mean, I saw it as vital. It was, it is without that, what, you have Milo goes to college. We all knew that. And then he
Right.
pops back up, I mean, because, as important as Milo is, and we love him, it's really Bill's band, and Milo's the first one to say that, it's Bill's band. And so, because Milo had other plans, and it was a handshake kind of a deal. Nobody was mad at Milo. They knew, like, yeah, dude, go do science, and so, but we're going to keep going, and we're going to try all these iterations of ourselves, and yeah, I mean, and you wouldn't be where you were with the Descendants had it not be for all. I think even the appreciation that now people put onto the early Descendants, if all hadn't have been kicking that can the whole time and keeping them relevant and inspiring all these bands along the way, so anyway, I view it as their vital part of the story.
Now, I mean, I gotta ask about sort of the animated sequences in the film, which I absolutely love. And I mean, I gotta figure, like, walk me through sort of the inspiration for that. And I mean, because I've got it, like, I can feel the relationship just to the Milo, like, drawings that are so synonymous with the band as well. It really felt sort of like a good marriage to put a little bit of that in there to sort of give their irreverence sort of a contextual meaning.
Yeah, I mean, for sure, there's always been the connection with All and the Simpsons, because Allroy looks like Bart Simpson, and Matt Groening, the creator of the Simpsons, was a Descendants fan, and he reviewed Milo Goes to College way back in the day when he was a writer for one of the LA music mags. And so there's always, I think, been that connection, even with fans, just Simpsons, or a lot of nerds like Simpsons, a lot of nerds like the Descendants. And so, yeah, it was great to get that, kind of that style of animation. The guys that helped us from Belgium, iMove Studios, some really great guys, and they're like punk rock dudes too. So yeah, that some of their little things that they created, we kind of gave them some guidelines, and we got to retell this story. We have no photos or footage of it, and they really came up with some great stuff in the spirit of the band. It feels like, and so yeah, those are some of my favorite parts, and a lot of people love those little sequences, and it definitely feels in the spirit of the band. And so
Something else I really dug about the film is just because, I mean, for people on the outside looking in, they don't always understand sort of the punk rock idea, and sort of they'll look at the community as a little grimy, a little scary, but at the same time, it has the potential to be this very warm and very opening community at the same time. And I really felt that came through in the film. How important was it for you guys just to sort of show this universe where, despite the multiple band changes, like you said before, like, these guys were all friends, they're all getting along, they all have the same idea, and they want to kind of push forward on it?
Yeah, and I mean, kind of the anti-punks at the time, kind of in that scene, no mohawks, no, you know what I mean? They literally didn't care at all what they were wearing. I mean, to a fault, some people might say, and but yet their attitude, and their work ethic, and their, their honesty in the lyrics and all this. I mean, that's what, makes them punk, and I would argue, and a lot of people would argue, that that's really what that is. Punk rock is one of these things. It's a label that, it is just a label, but there's always been punks in any generation. People just call it punk rock, but it's that kind of pushback on the mainstream, the status quo, whether it be overtly or just like, okay, I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to do this. I'm going to kind of stay in my head and figure myself out, And so, yeah, I mean, that they're a great example of what I love about punk rock, and it's that truth, and that, they're inspiring. They're hardworking, they give a shit, it's,
sure.
it's rare, and so, yeah, I mean, I love, and all those guys who are part of that, and they're all in varying degrees of, the look of punk rock or whatever, but they all have that ideal, that I think a lot of people who are into the music share.
Now, how important was it for you guys? Because I love hearing Dave Grohl's perspective on it, because like you are telling us a story about two bands with a lot of crossover.
Yeah.
And historically, those stories have never gone all that well. How important was it to have sort of subject matter of people who have been there to sort of reflect on the experiences that they had?
Matt, you probably take that one better.
Well, I'm just gonna say Dave Grohl's the epitome of that kind of, especially in pop, in the pop culture, pop music, that's what was amazing for him to just say that. And it was when he spoke of being in a really big band and then trying to start a new band, and it's hard, and yeah, what better person to say that, I mean, he's talking about a different scale of maybe,
of course, yeah,
base, but and I remember when he said that wasn't anything that we went in there going, oh yeah, we got to get him to say that. It was, he had this realization while he was saying it. Because he was kind of the first one to say, I was never the biggest all guy. I love the Descendants, he goes into that about how Bill taught him. He learned how to play drums from watching or trying to play what Bill's playing and all this. And he has stories of meeting Bill and just being like, oh man, it's my hero over there, and then, but he's also he was never that into all, just for whatever reason, probably just his generation, he was doing his own thing at the time they were really going, and he wasn't paying attention. But for him to make that realization, like, yeah, that does probably suck for all, he's like, believe me, I know it's hard to start something new from the ashes of something else, so yeah, I mean, it was awesome. We just knew him as a fan of the band. We'd read magazines and seen some clips of him talking about it, so we knew he would be a great person to get. But yeah, that was kind of an extra bonus when we were talking to him. It's like, oh yeah, man.
Something else that I really loved, it's like seeing these guys and seeing them talk about each other. You can feel the camaraderie, you can feel the love, but at the same time, it almost felt like, as much as these guys were the shift into pop punk, you can almost feel it now. It's almost like the pop punk classic rock with I think it was Milo or Bill just said, hey, if we want to hang out, let's book a few dates. Like that, that sort of having that acknowledgement, sort of almost feels like it takes the band to a different level, where they're very sort of self-reflective on their legacy and not only what they've done, but what they can still do. And I'm kind of curious, like seeing the evolution of having these guys talk about it from both of your perspectives. Like, where do you think the band lies, sort of? I mean, this is a loaded question, but sort of on a historical scale, especially when it comes to punk rock, because they really are at an interesting pivot point when it comes to the music business.
I mean, I think that their kind of legacy and legend will continue to grow as they continue. And it's kind of, I'm wearing this Ramones shirt, and I think about those guys. The Ramones, we see them as this iconic, legendary band, but like even into the mid 90s, when they were still touring and they had played like Lollapalooza, they still weren't making a ton of money and weren't super famous and rich. And I remember reading how Johnny Ramone talked about, once he makes $1 million, he would quit. And that's what he did in 96 or whatever. He finally made $1 million after being in the Ramones for 20 years. And so and then those guys kind of, as they stopped playing and as they passed away, they really became icons. And so I think with Descendants, it's going to be the same kind of thing, where they continue to just become a bigger and bigger deal. And it sucks. I mean, they're getting to enjoy some of that in their lifetime, but it's one of those things where it'll probably, their kids will probably benefit more from the Descendants than they ever did while they were alive and living.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's, I think doing this movie from their perspective, I mean, I say that I think, I mean, a couple of them have told me that, it really did allow them to actually enjoy it, to kind of look back and go, oh yeah, like we did all this stuff, and there's something to be proud of, because a lot of times when they're in the thick of it, all they're doing is going, oh man, like less people are at the show this tour than we're at the last show. And like, we got to change it up, but to be able to, I think for them to be able to look at what they've done and, it's put them at a really good place. And even when we were interviewing them, it was very apparent that they're in a good place where they're able to enjoy it now, they're able to see the funny things, the harsh things, and the enjoyment of it. And yeah, I mean, I agree with Deedle. I think that, it's just going to kind of keep going. They're an important band, to a lot of people. And they're I kind of call them a band's band. There's a lot of other bands and musicians who would not be where they are had it not been for these guys. And we have people in our movie saying that, and there's many others, and not even just famous musicians, just people in their lives who, this is a band that is, you love them for life, and you kind of follow their lives because their lyrics are all about their life. And you can kind of, a band like this, as you're going through life, that's why young people like them. And that's why young adults like them, because you can kind of see yourself in their songs and almost take advice from them in a way, So anyway, I feel strongly about that they are an important band that, is still getting their due.
Well, and I mean, I think it's like you say, they didn't necessarily care about sort of the image of it all, because I mean, they evolved from, the nerdy kid punk rockers to now sort of a really cool version of the dad garage band that is still going out, but can kind of really kick ass at the same time. And I mean, I'm just kind of curious now, because I mean, I know the film's been in the can for a few years and it's just starting to getting a bit of a relife now. Like, how has sort of the legacy of the film not only helped their fandom, but maybe sort of impacted them, like personally, like you say, to be able to look on it and go, yeah, this was a good run. We had fun with this.
Yeah. I mean, I just know kind of like I said, that they, I think they appreciated the process. It was a tough thing. And Deedle talked about it a minute ago, how they were hands off. I always say, can you imagine somebody coming into your life for a year with cameras and just shooting everything, and then they just one day go, all right, and they just leave for another year? And during that year, wouldn't you and most people be going, wait, did I say something about, and then send me a text like, hey, make sure you don't make me look like a dick when I said blah. Like there was none of that. Like, and so, I think they just said, I mean, they all gave these amazing interviews where they just, hours of interviews, and then they would just go, all right, we're just going to trust this. What else can we do? We just got to trust these guys. And I also think Deedle and I, being such kind of fanboy weirdos in the beginning, where we were kind of like, oh, excuse me, sir, could we interview? I think that almost probably helped us, because they at least saw a little bit of purity in us. Like, we weren't walking in going, all right, here's what we're going to do. We were like, oh, is it okay if we come backstage on this day? We were polite maybe. and I think they at least realized, all right, well, what's the worst these guys can do to us, Well,
and I think that's where the magic of the film comes in, because you're coming to it not as a slick packaged sort of trying to make a story about, this band and, oh, they're so influential. It's like you're telling a story about these guys whose music that really touched you and you were influenced by. And I think that comes across in the film, and it comes across with everybody that you talk to. And it's a lot of fun, and I'm glad it's getting a bit of a second life and people are going to see it and continue the legacy of the Descendants and of all, which is like you say, like it's an important thing to keep what these guys did going, because they really hit at this really interesting time in music history, and it's shaped so many things going forward. It's important to see.
For sure. Well, thanks.
Totally agree. Thanks.
Well,
man.
Thanks for the time, guys. But this was a lot of fun. I appreciate this a lot.
Thank you.
Us too, man. Thanks, David.
With the guys, and it was a fun one. So enjoy. And don't forget to visit our friends over at Bay Street Video for all your DVD, Blu-ray rental, or purchasing needs this summer, as they are still open for curbside and some mailing delivery as well. Over at 1172 Bay Street, Toronto, Ontario, Canada, you can give them a call at 416-964-9088. That's 416-964-9088. Or send them an email at baystreetvideoto@gmail.com for any of your DVD and Blu-ray needs.